Good morning, everybody, and thank you to the organizers for having me here and giving me the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper after this introduction of Florian in what the regulation could mean in practice for wetland restoration in the EU. And I will point at some pitfalls, some trade-offs, and also some of the weakening that happened in the law during the negotiation process. So we all know that we lost most of our wetlands already a long time ago. Some countries it's up to 75%. In the country I am coming from, we calculated that since the 1950s we lost 80% of our wetlands, and for some types of wetlands even 95% since the Second World War. So the loss of wetlands is huge, and that's especially important when we know that they are so crucial in the global greenhouse gas budgets. Many wetlands play a role as a sink for carbon, but sometimes, and especially when they degrade, they become a source, so that's need to be avoided. We know flood risk reduction also as a key aspect of an ecosystem service provided by wetlands, water purification, impact of storms from the sea, drought risk reduction, water storage, infiltration. So you know all these advantages of restoring wetlands. But they are also vulnerable at the same time by climate change. And so there is not only a benefit for mitigation and adaptation to climate change, but under climate change we see also them as a pressure that really helps degrading the wetlands. They are important for biodiversity. To my knowledge, there is no number of how many species, how much biodiversity wetlands have in Europe, but there is one global number provided by the Ramsar Convention that wetlands support no less than 40 to 45% of the world species. So really incredible amount. And this is especially relevant if you see for Europe, for instance, that wetland types only cover a relatively small proportion of the land, in this case 6.5% of the EU. And this in contrast with forests, for instance, up to 40% of the EU in land cover, and they get relatively more attention in terms of restoration and recreation of nature. So planting trees is something that people like, but restoring wetlands is sometimes harder to accomplish. But as you see here, in this small area that we have of remaining wetlands in Europe, they are really crucial for biodiversity. In Flanders, for instance, where I come from, we calculated that of all the red listed species we have in Flanders, more than half is dependent on wetlands. And the reason that they are so biodiverse is, of course, that the wetlands are there in various forms and have this large variation in ecological condition, such as salinity, humidity, productivity, the succession stage, and also whether it is a man-made or a wild system. And the biological value of the wetlands is, of course, also impacted by human influences. So how does the Nature Restoration Regulation deal with the wetlands, the topic of today? And for the Article 4 that Florian explained, we have a classification of all habitat types that are included in the Annex 1 of the Habitats Directive, and they were categorized in 6 categories, with wetlands, coastal and inland, and then on one side, and river, lake, alluvial, and riparian habitat types at the other side, for the other one. So you see that together they form a proportion of habitat types that is as large as the forest habitat types. Even we are dealing with a much smaller proportion of land in the EU. Also take into account that a lot of really valuable habitat types are not included in the Annex 1, like reed marshes or tall sedge vegetations, Cultion grasslands, for instance. But they can be very important for species, and when there is an Annex 2 or Annex 4 species of the Habitat Directive that is in need for these habitat types, then it becomes more or less also protected, but it is not part here of this classification for in the nature restoration law. And also some grasslands, for instance, that are really wet systems that depend groundwater supply, like Molinian grasslands. I would also call them wetlands, but here they are categorized in the category of grassland. We also have wet subtypes of Nardus grasslands, for instance, wet subtypes of Arenatherions that you have in the floodplains, but they are here all categorized in the grasslands. So take that into account when you are involved in designing restoration plans for wetlands. Okay, so here you a quick overview. These are the group 1, so they are called wetlands, coastal and inland in the regulation. And you see they consist of coastal and salt wetlands, mires, and then permanent wet forests and grasslands or heaths. And together I would call them terrestrial or semi-terrestrial wetlands. And then the second group of wetlands are the rivers, lakes, and the riparian and alluvial habitats. And this is something that you can discuss, but the Commission opted to have the alluvial meadows and alluvial or riparian forests included here in this group, and not in the group of the Group 1, the terrestrial or semi-terrestrial wetlands. This is something that can be discussed, especially because that what is here mentioned as alluvial forests of alluvial meadows is not always occurring in the context of a real river valley. They can also be part of a depression in the landscape, for instance, where they occur. But for the purpose of the restoration law, they are here grouped here with the purely aquatic habitat types. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper in their conservation status. So the first group of wetlands, in fact, this is really a point of attention for the conservation community, because the wetlands, this group has the lowest proportion of habitats in good condition, in favorable conservation status. And it also at the same time has the highest proportion of unknown condition. So there's apparently a very clear need of more research, more inventarizations to clear especially the unknown and determine whether they are in good or bad conservation status. The pressures, we know them. Mainly it has to do with changes in the hydrology, degradation due to land management that is not appropriate, pollution, natural processes like invasion of trees, for instance, and then deliberate conversion of the habitat into something else, alien species, climate change. Climate change, I would put it higher in this ranking. But these are the results of what member states are reporting under the Article 17 of the Habitat Directives as the main pressures for Group 1 of the wetlands. Then the second group, so the rivers, lakes, and alluvial wetlands. There's a bit better situation. Almost a quarter is unknown, but more than half are reported from the member states as being in good condition, which I would also intuitively put a question mark behind, because if you start looking at a lot of wetlands, you see always points that are of concern, but it is easily then apparently assessed as good condition. Perhaps it's also the result of not doing proper field work and field inventarization on the presence of these pressures. Anyhow, the status is the pressures are more or less the same, but here we have pollution and alien species that are ranked much higher in importance than in the former group. So you already heard from Florian the different articles that are part of the Nature Restoration Law, and these are really the clues that you can use for your national restoration plan to boost wetland restoration in your country. And the most important one is, of course, Article 4, with the habitat types and the protected species habitats, as long as they are dependent on wetlands, of course, in the urban environment, urban wetlands, rivers and floodplains, the pollinators that are typically occurring in wetland systems, and then in agriculture systems you have blue and green infrastructure that can be promoted. We have this obligation on peat soil rewetting and on meadow birds, increasing the number of meadow birds, and then the same for forest ecosystems. So I will take you now to an overview that Florian already presented, so I will try to go a little bit quickly over these targets. And I will also point at the weakening that happened during the negotiation process, because the weakening is introduced because of member states. They don't want to have too high ambition. So it's important for you to see where we come from and what is actually in the law and how it will be implemented. So it's important for you to remember these changes that were made. So by 2030, 30% of the wetlands need to be under some kind of restoration regime in order to achieve a good condition. And good condition, you can read the definition here, is structures and function and typical species composition must reflect the high level of ecological integrity, stability and resilience necessary to ensure its long-term maintenance and thus contribute to reaching or maintaining favorable conservation status of a habitat. So this is work for the scientists to explain that to their government, what this means in practice. But that is what is needed to be achieved. Good condition, 30% by 2030, 60 by 2040, 90 by 2050. And then we have this favorable reference area, which to me is the most crucial one and that will determine the ambition level of the member states in their national restoration plans. So favorable reference area, read the definition, is the total area of a habitat type necessary to ensure the long-term viability of the habitat type and its typical species or species composition. So because a lot of our wetlands are fragmented, degraded, this favorable reference area that we have to achieve to make those wetlands more robust against all pressures from the surroundings is really a key that will make a big difference in the field for the long-term viability of wetlands in good condition. Then we have a lot of protected species in the Habitats and Bird Directive, and also for them the law does not come up with concrete numbers that need to be achieved, but they say you have to look also in your national restoration plan that these protected species have sufficient habitat quality and quantity, and you have to improve connectivity to build a more strong and connected meta-population structure, for instance. very important for the scientific community, the law explicitly mentions that member states need to use the best available scientific knowledge. So I hope they all come talking to you, that you can help them and say, look, this is the state of the art, what we know, what needs to be done. In the law, there is a continuous improvement obligation, and then there is the famous non-deterioration obligation. There are some exceptions, like in the Habitats Directive, they are already also mentioned, but this is a very strong provision in the law. Once you start restoring your wetland, you can no longer have it degraded afterwards. So you have to take care of it, do adaptive management, keep it in good shape, adjust measures or do additional measures so that it is in that there is no deterioration. So this is this is what the proposal was of the Commission. So now let's see what happened during the negotiation process, all the weakening that happened. By 2030, member states can say we will only do restoration in the Natura 2000 sites. We don't want to look outside Natura 2000. This is possible. And also the 30% of habitats, this is now 30% of the total habitat groups, so all habitats together. So member states could say, by 2030, I will only go look at the low-hanging fruit, do some measures in forests that are more nature-friendly and say, look, this is our plan for by 2030 and doing nothing for wetlands. And in fact, so this is a possibility with this provision in the law. Fortunately, the goals for by 2040 remain the same, and by 2050, there is 90% also that is mentioned to be restored, but for habitats that are very abundant in a member state, like I can imagine in Finland, the peatlands there, for instance, they cover more than 3% of the country, so it's okay, says the Commission, you are okay with 80% to be restored by 2050. And there's also a possibility for derogation that for the favorable reference area, it's okay if you end up with between 90 and 100% instead of 100%. Then for the species, it remains the same. Best available scientific knowledge is still there. Continuous improvement obligation. But then on the non-deterioration obligation, there were a lot of derogations that are now in the law. So if you member states can also say, we do not want to comply with non-deterioration because we are here in a defense area, military defense area, or we need to build renewable energy plants here in this site. So that is not included in the non-deterioration obligation. What also changed is that no deterioration changed into no significant deterioration. So, like, as an ecologist, then I start thinking, to what level can you call the drainage of a wetland? From what point does it start to become significant? So I don't know, so I hope the Commission will come up with some guidance on that so that all member states, and with the help of the scientific community, can provide clarity and that we can move on with our plans and also the enforcement of the law. So the obligation of result that originally was in the proposal of the Commission is now obligation of effort. Member states shall endeavor. What does that mean exactly? I would say obligation of efforts, well, I can imagine a list of actions that you need to do for restoring a wetland. So that would be my list of efforts that you need to do. But is this also what how the member states and how the Commission will interpret this change in phrasing in this provision? And then outside Natura 2000, there's also a weakening that non-deterioration is no longer at site level, but it can also be applied at the whole biogeographical region within your country for that habitat type. And so you can say this site outside Natura 2000 is okay if it deteriorates further. We don't want to invest in it for some reason, but we have we can do something elsewhere within the biogeographical region of that country instead. So this is what this provision says. So you see there's a lot of weakening and tricky reasoning also that need to be done to make this work in practice. I make it a little bit clear, perhaps, for you who are, is this a first introduction to the nature restoration law? So let's imagine first step is this, where are my wetlands? First in Natura 2000, by 2030, so we focus on Natura 2000, but also outside Natura 2000. Then very importantly, we need to identify from all these sites their condition. So what is in good condition? What is in bad condition? And if there are, as I showed, there's a lot of sites that are still unknown, in unknown condition. Also here, a very big responsibility of site managers, of scientists, to come up with the information needed to have this, to make this work in practice. So then the third action is identify the FRA, so the favorable reference area. Then we are talking about heavily degraded or even lost wetlands that we think they can still be restored. And you see in the small graph below, you see 3 fragmented wetlands. In the past, this was one really big wetland. Now it is the favorable reference area is set to restore the whole wetland again. This is how it could work. Then we need to take measures for connectivity, the red arrows, and at the same time look where we need to do some additional tweaking or actions for providing sufficient quality and quantity for the habitats of protected species. And then in the end, the purpose of the law by 2050 is that we have this robust and resilient ecosystem cluster of areas that are in good condition. And of course, we need to look at landscape level to make sure that this happens. And you see that outside those clusters, there are some small fragments of areas, both Natura 2000 and not Natura 2000, that we accept, well, they are too small or it's too difficult here to restore them to good condition. Only 90% of your habitats in the end by 2050 need to be in good condition. So it's not realistic. From the small areas, they are there. We try to keep them like they are, no deterioration, but it is impossible to get them to the level of good condition. What is also important in the reasoning on the non-deterioration is that all our wetlands are buffered. You know all how important it is, how the drainage, the nutrients, they all come from the surrounding area. So if you don't buffer your area against these pressures, then you will never achieve a good condition in your site. This is something that should be looked at together with the articles on forest ecosystems, on urban ecosystems, and on agriculture ecosystems. It's not mentioned in the law that you need to buffer, but that's what I propose to the scientific community, that this is must always be a point of attention when we are talking about sustainable wetland restoration and non-deterioration afterwards. Okay, there are a list of critical success factors. So first of all, good condition. What does that mean? And how is the condition at this moment? Many countries don't have yet a good view on that. What are the pressures for each site individually? We are not talking about the favorable conservation status as it was an obligation in the Habitats Directive. Here we are talking about condition at the site level. We need to define the favorable reference area. I hope that it's clear what it means. Then put a target situation forward that can be achieved, where good condition can be achieved, and what the measures are that are necessary to get there. Public participation is also a necessity in the law, and you all know that how it can be very tricky if you have to talk to the farmers in the surrounding of the wetland, and you have to talk about less drainage and less nutrient input. It's not simple. So I would welcome a lot of help from the Commission in guidance how this could work, and also how the common agriculture policy could anticipate on what we need here to restore our wetlands. Then for the implementation measures, the scientists again can come up with best practices. We want good restoration. So the best practice, according to the state of the art of restoration, is crucial. So this is an important role for scientific community and all other experts to help here. And then we need to monitor and report and adaptive management, because when you start restoring, if you are involved in restoration projects, you find out that at some point in time, well, there's something that is not completely right. You need to do additional measures and to adjust things, and that is called adaptive management. So first, homework for you all, and for the also for the site managers, is to identify for each site what are my pressures. What needs to be done at site level to ever reach good condition? It's crucial information. If the people in the government who are drafting the National Restoration Plan don't know the details, they will never put it in their National Restoration Plan. So we must have maps with, that indicate what is in good condition, what is not, and when it's not in good condition, what should be done about it. For the favorable reference area, I told you it's a crucial aspect in the nature restoration law. It will determine a lot of the ambition level. We did an exercise in Flanders, and we found that after the Second World War, we still had 236 hectares of wetlands divided over tidal wetlands, the peat-forming wetlands, the 56,000 hectares, and the alluvial wetland types, so where the water level drops deeper during summer, 176,000 hectares. So this looks quite large proportion of Flanders, as you see, 19%. But what we have now is this: we lost 80%. So only tiny fragments are left here and there, and now we have to restore them with the nature restoration law. Then we try to map what can be achieved, what can be restored, and from our perspective as researchers, we believe that this area here, as you see it here, can still be restored, accounting for 196,000 hectares of Flanders. And that's, of course, hugely ambitious. But this is a map, kind of map, that you could try to make in every country that could help you, that could guide you in identifying the favorable reference areas for wetlands. And then we compared these favorable reference area of 17% of Flanders with what in the conservation objectives of the Habitats and Bird Directive is defined according to our law. And then we found that only 5 to 7% of what potentially can be achieved is included in the conservation objectives of the Birds and Habitats Directive. So you see the huge difference in ambition level. Now we have the opportunity with the National Restoration Plan to go far beyond that ambition level of the Birds and Habitats Directive. And especially if you know that 30% or 50,000 hectares is already in a situation where you have a protected area, where you have designation as Natura 2000 or a national nature designation. 30% of the potential can already be implemented there. So even in our nature areas, we have a lot of degradation. And so this could be the low-hanging fruit for the favorable reference area to be included in the plans by 2030. If you have the data, you can also then start to play with monetization of what could it deliver, what is the added value of my wetland restoration. And we did this exercise in Flanders with looking at several services like carbon sequestration, water retention, water purification, and then the negative impact on agriculture and negative impact on forestry, potentially. And then if you account also always for a minimum and a maximum estimate in terms of monetization, then you see that if you use the mean estimate, you are already in a positive scenario, a positive economic scenario. And with high estimates, you already amount up to 150,000 million euros as on the positive benefit for the society. So, okay, this was the Article 4. That is the most difficult part and most ambitious part of the nature restoration law. Does it mean that we don't have targets in urban regions? This is a city in my country. This used to be an open sewer that was vaulted, and so it was buried. You didn't see it. It was, we broke it open, and the water quality is much improved, and now it's really a nice place to walk and stay and relax in the cities. In cities, you can do a lot of good actions like promoting wadis, where you hold the flush waters from heavy precipitation a little bit longer in your area and give it time to infiltrate or slowly flow down discharge to rivers downstream. And also in parks. So this are all ideas that I hope will be picked up by the member states to include also in our urban environments more wetlands. So what does the nature restoration law say? There's for green spaces is that there is no decrease in total area. And from 2031, there must be an increasing trend. The nature restoration law doesn't say anything about the quality of these urban wetlands. So that's also something we have to fight for, to come up with guidance that, hey guys, you can achieve a lot higher biodiversity value if you do it in this way or that way, because now a simple lawn in a city park is counted as a green space. But make it a wet meadow, then it is a wetland and with a high biodiversity value, which is added value, of course, in our restoration plans. I don't have to talk a lot about this. So when we remove the barriers along the rivers, we can have our rivers that were canalized in the past re-meander again. And by removing the embankments, you can create room for water for flooding the floodplain again and saving flood risks or decreasing flood risks downstream. Beware also where the scientific community, I think, has an important role. I think there is a lot of public support for this approach. So safety against flooding. But remember that in the floodplains that were there and that no longer were flooded for 100 or 200 or 300 years, there can be very important nature values there. And if they are dependent on oligotrophic or mesotrophic conditions, and then you start flooding them, of course they disappear. So that is a typical example of trade-off of a climate action for adaptation that is not necessarily a good action for biodiversity. I have no clear answer what to do. It can be both, can be valid, can be argumented case by case, but it is something I encourage the scientific community to engage in, also to try to avoid too much biodiversity loss through this approach. So this is an example then of when you remove the embankments, how the floodplain could look like. There's pollinators, there are a lot of pollinators, bees, hoverflies, butterflies that are dependent on wetland ecosystems. The law allows you to take action for some of these species and do something about their habitat requirements, for instance. It's also perfectly fine if you don't do it. According to the law, it's up to us. If we say you must, we think you should do it. So if we say nothing, well, then they will probably never look at invertebrates in wetland systems. Very important in terms of area is also our ambition for wetlands in agriculture ecosystems. On the left, you see a typical pond in a Western European agriculture landscape, quite natural, and then one in the Mediterranean, very artificial, but both can have some biodiversity value, and there are studies that say that a lot of these small ponds in the landscape can house more biodiversity than one big lake of the same total size. And so they can be important in terms of connectivity, for instance. We also have targets for reaching good status of meadow and other farmland birds. So these meadow birds often depend on wet situations that were lost due to drainage. So this is also a clue that we can take to define ambitions in the agriculture ecosystems for more wetlands. Then we have the peat soil rewetting. 3% of the area in Europe is drained peat, but it is responsible for 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the agriculture sector. It should be a no-brainer to stop the drainage in this 3% area of Europe. And another number that is useful when you are debating about the peatland rewetting is that 7% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from drained peatland in the EU, while aviation, which we typically connect with a high footprint in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, is only accounting for 3%. So it's much more, it's double the amount of all our aviation footprint. And it's not sustainable. And we know that where you drain the peat soils subsidence is going faster than the peat can ever build up again. And the land subsidence goes with a rate of between 2 or 3 centimeters a year. And you see this person there in some peatland areas that were drained in Europe, and you see how fast it can go, that your peat is really going down and all the carbon is going in the air. So there is an end to this, and it cannot go forever. The costs for drainage are always higher, so we should stop it as soon as possible. There are solutions for alternative economic models for farmers that are active in those peat soil agriculture lands, like paludiculture, wet agriculture, carbon farming. And there's a lot of scientific evidence, and I put the link there, that we should be very ambitious about carbon or peat soils rewetting in agriculture use. I give you also this to show the weakening that happened also for this. So, you know, with the agriculture strikes that we had, and agriculture became, for food security, suddenly also this agriculture on peat soils, which is really not very economically viable. It's viable through subsidies delivered by the Commission, by the Common Agriculture Policy. But even then, they managed to weaken the law. Instead of 50 or 70% to be restored, it's only 40 to 50%. And instead of half rewetted, it's only a third rewetted. And there was a question, and I fully agree, half rewetting, that doesn't, you can decrease the greenhouse gas emissions a bit by raising the water level a bit, but what we need is really to have high water levels and up to the soil almost, and the topsoil, if we want to stop greenhouse gas emissions. So this, to me, will be an improvement, but it is by far not where we have to go as soon as possible. Then they have other derogations that you could, for 40% of your targets, look at other areas outside agriculture use to do there some rewetting, like in former extraction areas. We also argumented that, well, I will have impact on infrastructure or buildings, or this road will flood. So when we raise the water level, we cannot do the restoration of this peatland. It is acceptable with this derogation. And also, if you're a farmer and or an owner, landowner, and you own this peat soil with intensive agriculture on it, you cannot be held accountable yourself. And so it has to be an initiative then from the government to say, let's do something about peatlands here in agriculture use. And there's also in the law another derogation that says that, well, at least until 27, member states cannot be obliged to change their subsidies to farmers for draining the peat soils. They can keep on doing that until the next multi-annual framework, and even then it has to be negotiated. So you don't have to reprogram any funding. If you use it now for draining, you can keep doing that. And it's not over. There's then an emergency break, the temporary suspension of restoration obligations for agriculture ecosystems. So everything I told you about meadow birds and improving the ecological quality of our agriculture landscapes is really hampered. It's really made much more difficult with these changes in the law, unfortunately. Okay, and then my last, and this is my last slide, I think, is on forest ecosystems. It has been mentioned already. We can do a lot of good things there as well for rewetting by closing ditches, for instance, by increasing also carbon stocks in form of dead wood, or in case of peat soils, less greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, this is my last slide, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Kris, for this amazing presentation and really nice overview that you have made, and also reference into also the Florian presentation, the Nature Restoration Law. Because we are a little bit late on time, we're gonna ask you a question that we have from the chat from Astrid Severing as well. She's thanking you for this very interesting presentation, and asking, do you have estimates how much it will cost to restore the 145,000 hectares of wetlands in Flanders? I think she's referring to the case study that you mentioned in the. So do you have a whole estimation?
I don't have a number in my head, but I know that the profit, the benefit, the return value is larger than the investment cost.
Okay,
and
perfect.
so you can always go to the European Investment Bank. Any member state can do and take a loan and do the restoration, and then with the return in value you can pay back.
Yeah, perfect. And it's very interesting that you were mentioning this case study in which they were providing a cost-benefit analysis. I think in REWET we are trying to kind of like do the same analysis for our open labs, and I think it's a really nice baseline scenario that we can provide to also have this kind of estimation. So thank you very much. Because of the time, we are going to do the short coffee break, so we are going to try to shorten it a little bit, just to maximum 20 minutes. So if any of you here present have any questions to Kris, I encourage you to ask him during the coffee break. And after this quick coffee break, we can go with Alessandro for the next presentation. But thank you again, Kris, for this presentation.